How hard is it to learn a foreign language? Did you know that in the United States alone, 67.3 million people are bilingual, or according to the Center of Immigration Studies, that's 20.6% of the population. I suspect those numbers are much lower because when I was becoming fluent in Spanish, I discovered the number of people who claimed to be fluent in Spanish couldn't hold a conversation with me. Now that I think about it, maybe that might have been an indication that perhaps I wasn't as fluent as I thought I was. That would explain the perplexed looks on their faces as I tried to hold conversations with them. An interesting list I came across from Stillman Translations is that the top languages for bilinguicity, not a real word, but it sounds kind of intellectual, so I'm going to go with that, are Spanish, Portuguese, French. That doesn't correlate with the most spoken native languages in the United States, which according to Wikipedia are English, Spanish, Chinese, and Tagalog. While that appears to be a miscommunication of different sources of information, what I think we're seeing is that the first list is bilingual numbers, and the second list is focusing on people who might just speak one language. I'll admit, learning a language is never an easy task. Years ago, when I first went into the Army, I discovered I had a knack for languages. They give you a test called the DLAB, the Defense Language Aptitude Test. Come to think of it, I'm not really sure what the B stands for in DLAB. But considering the fact that it's the military, it's probably classified, and they'll send out Navy SEALs from SEAL Team 6 to wipe you out if you figure it out. I just looked it up. The B stands for battery. Anybody hear that on the roof? But when I took the DLAB test, I remember the administrator telling me that I had scored higher than anyone he had ever seen. I was 1 point away from maxing the entire thing. He rechecked my score because he couldn't believe it was that high. I'll return to this subject in a moment. I promise. I have had a few interesting experiences with languages over the years, and I thought I would share them with you. Let's start with Spanish. Like most Southern Californians, Spanish was the logical choice of a foreign language for me to learn. I started young in life, and by the time I got to high school, I had taken 7 years of Spanish. I also had a best friend from Ecuador, and a number of other friends I knew whose families were from Mexico. I had lots of experience to learn Spanish. After a while, it kind of came natural. While in high school, I'd hit a point where the school didn't actually have any more classes in Spanish I could take. I'd already completed the last class they had available. So they put me and one of my friends into a beginning Spanish class where the teacher would give us advanced assignments in Spanish. And sometimes she did. Most of the time she didn't. Most of the time she put me and my friend in a far corner and left us to our own desires. So we spent most of the class just joking and having fun, which caused the rest of the class to pay more attention to us than anything the teacher was teaching. So she figured out a way to stop that, and that was to separate us and put us on far sides of the room. Well, not about to be defeated, my friend and I devised a hand signal language that let us communicate fluently, different fingers and stuff like that. And even though we were far away from each other. In the beginning, we had to rely on a sheet of paper that indicated what hand signal was. Mostly fingers that represented individual letters of the alphabet. Doing this for a couple of weeks, we quickly became fluent in this finger language and no longer needed the sheet of paper. I don't know if you realize how awesome this was for two kids to devise their own representative language, but we did. And then one day, one of our teachers lectured about a language that was completely devised by numerous governments to build a world language. It was called Esperanto. A friend and I found the data on this language at the local library. Remember those? They used to have these things called books in them, and people could check them out. It was like the Middle Ages back then. So we did, we learned it. So, back to that day taking the D-Lab test. The way the test was designed is that the test tries to teach you a language to see how likely you are to be able to learn a foreign language. Newsflash, the language they try to teach you is Esperanto. So when I was taught this new language, I was already fluent in it. So it was like they were trying to teach me the basics of English. That's why I received such a high score. I didn't have a great time with every language schools tried to teach me. When I was in the latter part of high school, I'd run out of Spanish classes I could take. So, as I had an elective to fill, I followed my girlfriend to French. I'll admit, I hated French. But I was stupid enough to want to please her, so I went. And then, a few weeks into the class, she dropped it and took something easier. And then a few weeks into the class, she dropped it and took something easier, leaving me in the class because I wasn't smart enough to follow her to where she ended up. All I remember that class was how hard it was to pronounce anything. The teacher would say, "Avez?" and I would respond with, "Avez?" and she would shake her head and say, "No, avez?" and I would repeat, "Avez?" and of course it would be wrong again. To this day, if someone says "avez" to me, that might lead to immediate war. To be completely honest, that's about all I remember learning from that French class, and I know I will never take a French class again. So when I was in the Army, they sent me to Germany, and while in Germany, I immediately picked up the language. I didn't have any formal training, but I sure did pick it up fast. My next language came because of my D-Lab score. They put me in training to learn Korean, which at the time was considered the hardest language to learn that the Defense Language Institute actually taught. So, like I said, they put me in training to learn Korean. Now, this was a completely different language to me, and it is constructed in a different way than previous languages that I have learned. Having the verb first in a sentence was kind of difficult for me to grasp until it started to make sense. I was fortunate that the military paid me to learn the language, as I don't think I would ever have tried to learn it on my own. The language after that was Japanese, which not surprisingly has a similar sentence structure to Korean. Considering the fact that Korean was created most recently in history, I doubt one would be surprised to find out it is patterned after both Chinese and Japanese. Just look at Korea on a map. That should make complete sense. The same with Japan. Being so close to China, that would explain why Japan uses nearly 2,000 language characters that originated from China. I looked at Chinese, Cantonese, some time ago, but considering the fact that they use something like 10,000 script characters, I stopped trying to learn that language really fast. In conclusion, according to the UK's Alzheimer's Research for a Cure site, being bilingual slows down Alzheimer's by 4.5 years. With my languages, that's 22.5 years. I mean, that's math, right? And you can't go wrong with that.